Ladies and gentlemen, family and friends, scholars and dignitaries, welcome to another episode. Welcome to my world. So this week I read an article that was very serious and very disturbing, in fact, on several levels. It goes to show just how insane government could be, especially if it's run by incompetence or by people who choose to place political preferences over the people themselves. Let me begin with this. All legislators are voted into their positions, and all government officials have one and only one mission: the health, safety, and welfare of the people. There is no other purpose and no other reason why they should be in government or even why we should have government. It is all about the health, safety, and welfare of the people. I don't care if you are young or old, male or female, black or white, liberal or conservative. You are not there to represent Democrats or Republicans. You are not there to represent corporate America. You certainly aren't there to enrich in your pocketbooks. You are there to maintain certain norms and responsibilities, ultimately for the betterment of the people, for the people, and at the very least, for the health, safety, and welfare of the people. That is job number one. Well, here's another government foobar I want to share. You've all seen it, although this has just now been reported in a newspaper in a nearby city. According to a study that was just released, crime and violence is off the chart in 2020 from any comparative year going back almost 20 years. 20 years. Now, as an aside, government attempted to explain this. They said it was because of COVID, of course, and the stress and isolation forced people into becoming criminals. What? Well, I looked up the side effects of COVID and I saw fever, chills, body aches, breathing problems, and, although rare, cardiac complications. But I did not see anywhere that the CDC said that COVID causes homicide or murder. Trust me, I looked. It wasn't there. No, COVID does not turn you into a criminal. No, something else happened in 2020, something horrible. Anyway, this article gave several examples of the magnitude of the crime increase the community is seeing. 6 people were shot during a street party that had grown so disorderly, and several people started a gunfight and innocent people were shot. And the next month in this city, 16 people were shot during another party, and unfortunately 2 died. And in total, 189 people were shot in this community during a 6-month period. 189 people. Now, the fact is that violent crime has been dropping significantly for years in this city, as it has elsewhere. In fact, for the last 20 years. We as a society, in unison with government, schools, the faith community, the police, the private sector, public services, and community neighborhoods, were able to largely accomplish what many said we could never do. We drove crime and violence down to lower levels. Still unacceptably too high, but much better than before. We saved thousands of lives, millions of injuries, and billions of dollars in property damage, hospital costs, and in tax savings. But all of a sudden, crime and violence spiked tremendously in 2020. Homicides were up 56%. Shooting victims saw a 90% increase. Shootings with multiple victims increased 208%. Aggravated assaults increased 11%, the highest total in the city since 2011. And the rate of both opioid overdoses and deaths grew to one of the highest in the state. Robberies, burglaries, and motor vehicle thefts all increased in 2020 in this community. And it wasn't just here, but crime and violence rose significantly in most of the major cities. In a nearby city, they reported the highest number of murders in that city's history. In New York City, murders increased 45% and shootings themselves increased 100%. One child reported to his teacher that he has to eat dinner on the floor because they're afraid of bullets being shot through the windows at night. That's the story you'll hear in the inner city schools every day, but that's not the story you'll hear on mainstream television news shows. Interesting, isn't it? Murder has increased in Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Detroit, Los Angeles, Seattle, Phoenix, and other major cities as much as 50%. In one study of 57 cities, homicides increased in 51 of those cities by an average of 37%. Prior to this, the largest increase in homicide ever seen in any city was 13%, and that was back in 1968. And there were increases in assaults, burglaries, and looting. And not just that, but there were riots and property damage, arson, and chaos well beyond what anyone thought possible. The police were attacked, many injured, police cars burned, and even several precincts were captured, surrendered, or burned. In Minneapolis, a six-floor, 190-unit affordable housing building for the poor was burned down, leaving only the first floor standing. This was housing for people who were poor. Families needed this housing, and protesters burned it down without a second thought or an apology. Just in Minneapolis, over 1,500 businesses were ransacked, looted, robbed, or burned. And across America, other buildings and businesses were torched, trashed, vandalized, broken into, and robbed, causing billions in insurance losses. And trust me, for taxpayers too. This has happened all over the country. It's gotten out of control. As an aside, it's likely that there are several factors that contributed to the spike in violence, but there is no doubt that the number one factor underlying this, and virtually every criminologist and sociologist will have to admit this, is the growing rift between the police and the communities they serve, factored with the vilification of the police by the false narratives being spread by a handful of protesters and a corrupt and incompetent media. And this resulted in less aggressive policing policies forced by government in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. Together, this has been a recipe for disaster, and now history proves it. And the result? City governments blamed the police. What? They blamed the police. They attacked the police. They vilified the police. Not the rioters, not the criminals, but the police. Now, I want to say something first. Back in the 60s and 70s, we had the Vietnam War. Now, our veterans today are held in high honor for the service they gave to their country, as well they should. But back then, it was different. The veterans coming home were spit at. They were called baby killers. They were cursed, rejected, and vilified. Horrible things. And again, they gave their blood for this country. There were over 50,000 soldiers killed in action, over 150,000 wounded, many permanently disabled, and over 1,500 missing in action. And when those soldiers returned home, instead of a warm welcome and a thank you, they received vile hatred and denunciation from a society that had turned against them. They went to serve as heroes, but returned as lepers. The media did it to our veterans in the Vietnam War, and they did it to our police now. To me, that's not a shame. It's a crime. So, where does this bring us? Well, shortly after this one article about the increase in violence came out, another report shortly came out, the mayor's police reform plan. This mayor, despite the increase in crime and violence, decided that all the crime and civil unrest was the fault of the police, and this mayor played it safe. The mayor went full political and blamed it on the police and decided that the police would need to be held accountable. What? The mayor released a police reform plan to satisfy the protesters. In other words, the mayor threw the police under the bus. So, despite the glaring increase in crime and violence, the response by government was to overlook the crime and violence and to attack the police for unspecified, intangible slights and slip-ups. And here is the basis of the mayor's plan. First, they are pulling all police officers out of the schools. As a result of the anti-police sentiment spread by a few protesters and the media, this city, as others, pulled their police officers, the school safety officers, out of the public schools. Now, the police were placed there at the request of the schools, especially after the school-based mass shootings. But to be honest, as much for the overall level of crime and disorder in the schools itself. The interaction of the police within the schools is, overall, a very welcomed initiative with many positives for the youth and their studies. But in a knee jerk reaction, these mayors pulled them out of the schools. What an insane and self sabotaging reaction. Then, the mayor is going to reduce the size of the police department, defund the police. Wait, what? That's right. Crime and violence is up. So government says they will reduce the size of their primary crime fighting resource, the police department. You may ask, where's the logic in that? And I would have to say there isn't any. That decision is irrational, inane, and counterproductive. It will result in yet more crime and a greater inability to respond, especially for the lesser crimes like assault and domestic disturbances and disorderly conduct. For instance, Mayor Bill de Blasio defunded the New York City police by $1 billion. What was he thinking? Only government would fight fire by throwing gasoline on it. Next, this mayor wants to cancel the contract with the police union so the city government could fire police officers at will. Of course, the police union contract has several safeguards for employees, so they can't be arbitrarily fired at whim, but only with cause and through a proper disciplinary procedure. Lord knows that police officers have had more than their share of disgruntled public complaints, and if they were fired for every such complaint without basis, the turnover rate would be 100%. So, keep politics out of it and let employee disciplinary procedures follow established policies like at every other business or company. By the way, this mayor has a history of firing without cause and has been sued for it. And again, this move would strip a police officer of whatever protection they have and deserve as any normal employee and place them under the total control of politicians. Of course, the mayor insists on more training for police. And by the way, I happen to think that this is an expert department, well trained, and I would give them a 99% approval rating with what I know. The mayor said that the police will be given periodic wellness exams, both physical and psychological, and will have to meet new standards to stay on the force. And there will be a wellness plan for officers, but their records will now be open for anyone to examine and critique. And this is where it gets really dirty. To open an employee's personnel file to anyone, especially to any lawyer, for something as simple as jaywalking, is only going to invite disaster and increase tremendously the number of lawsuits against the city. This is code for violation of an employee's most basic rights. And you don't forfeit your rights simply because you work for government, but that's what the politicians want. The mayor's plan said the police should identify tasks handled by sworn officers that could be handled by civilians. And so maybe cut the number of officers, but increase the number of civilians that can do the officers' work, or maybe use volunteers instead of police. I don't know. This really wasn't well thought out. The mayor's plan said that the department operates a wide range of community programs as they should, for instance, youth programs as outreach to the neighborhoods. But because it's difficult to ascertain how successful these programs are, they should be defunded. Again, the point is that it was the community that asked for these programs and the police responded. And they are very good programs. And yes, it is hard to determine if a program keeps a teenager off the mean streets and out of trouble. But you know what? Even if you can't prove it, people know it in their heart because they see it and believe it. And just to cut these programs again is counterproductive. The mayor's plan calls for a crisis intervention team that can help de-escalate events prior to the police arrival. Now, this is a good idea, but it is structured all wrong. This mayor structures it as a one or the other response, when as anyone who understands that domestic violence events can be the most deadly, knows that the best response is a response with both units, the police and the crisis team. And this next point is also disturbing. The city is 41% black, but the police force is only 13% black. So the mayor wants to hire more black officers. And so it doesn't violate federal laws against race discrimination. They're going to call it increasing diversity to get around it. But it is still illegal. There is a reason one takes a civil service test, and for 100 years it was that you had to score in the top three to be able to get a job. The standard was that the most experienced and qualified candidate should get the job, not a friend, not a family member, but the most qualified. But that's not what this mayor wants. They want to expand data and transparency to an absurd level, again, including the personnel files of the officers. They want to create a healthier police environment, one that is free of racism, misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia, although again, we've seen very little evidence of this in this police department. And the mayor wants raw data on how these officers are disciplined, promoted, and recruited, with special emphasis on enforcing disciplinary roles within the department. My gosh, they want to turn the police department into a Gestapo. The mayor's plan wants to examine the cumulative career total of traumatic stress, PTSD, suicidal ideation, depression, and so on for individual officers. And while saying that the department should consider forming a wellness unit, this is really about another level of governmental interference in judging the fitness and ability of officers who serve. And once you open that door to government, trust me, you can never close it. Finally, the plan mandates that the police department have, as a core value, the sanctity of human life, and in crowd control situations, quote, the focus should be on the safety and protection of people first and property second. This will mean that things like pepper spray, tear gas, rubber bullets, and flashbangs will always be dissuaded from use, even when the fact is that these non lethal means were one of the biggest helps in crime and crowd control and much more preferable to any other use of force. And there are some other recommendations that the mayor wants to push as well, like ending the policy on cash bail, which again can have some very negative consequences. And of course, others are calling for even more harsher and extreme police reform. They said they want to change the culture of the police itself. So basically, these people and this mayor want to reimagine the police department. And I guess that's a worthy goal, except for one thing. The police department did not just pop up in a random and haphazard, chaotic manner. No, it is one of the most efficient professional systems in the world. It took years and years to build a responsive law enforcement system, data driven, with professional management, proven crime fighting techniques, with input from seasoned veterans and well trained officers, negotiated with community services, supported with substantive policies, congruent with state and federal law, and targeted to particular crimes and high crime communities. Our police are some of the best trained professionals in the world. Most of them hold college degrees in police science and criminal justice. Each year, police handle some 60 million crimes and related complaints and deal with some 300 million contacts with schools, businesses, and the general public. And they have evolved into one of the finest systems designed simply to serve and protect. And as I have said, from my perspective, they have a 99% approval rating. So here's the thing. Crime and violence have increased significantly in some cities to the highest levels ever. But the government's response is contraindicated and counterproductive. It's another government snafu, only this time it can blow up right in our faces in a horrible way because no one is willing to stand up to this government or this media and say, wake up and stop this. Our people are dying. Well, I hope they do wake up and stop this because our people are dying. Hey, be safe, be well, and may God bless.